I got roped into speaking on human trafficking about 6 years ago when I didn't even know what human trafficking was. It was just a case of somebody was supposed to speak, they couldn't, so I Googled for 2 weeks, wrote up a nice paper full of statistics and examples, and I was fine until I actually spoke it out, and then it just hit me. And I had to actually do it 3 times in a row. And by the 3rd time, I could hardly speak. And for the week afterwards, I just was devastated. And I realized God had done something in my heart that I wasn't even aware of as I was writing this description, teaching about human trafficking. A friend of mine on the East Coast, Stephen Hamilton, had been involved in the issue of human trafficking both through his job in the U.S. and in Ukraine, where they do missions. And he connected me with the then administrator of the Orange County Human Trafficking Taskforce. And she sucked me in, and it's been there ever since. Well, we started as the Vineyard Anti-Slavery Team, trying to provide resources for churches that were involved in or wanting to get involved in the issue of human trafficking. But anyone who's been involved in it for a while knows that you can't just deal with trafficking. It's almost like that's the symptom. You have to go back to the causes, everything from poverty to racial injustice and gender inequality and lack of educational options, and just you have to incorporate everything, and even the environmental issues. You notice the trash dumps are always in the poor part of town. So it was already said at a meeting last night, but people want to give. People want to find a way to help. But sometimes it takes a lot of work to figure out how to help. And so what we're trying to do is to provide ways that people can step in, and it's not so hard. And this is kind of a silly example, but a couple years ago we did a big all-church yard sale in the parking lot to raise money for a specific human trafficking budget. And I just looked at it as a way to raise money for what I was trying to get done. I had several people come up to me at the end of the morning and say, "Thank you for giving me a way to participate. I can't go to the meetings. I can't work with human trafficking victims. I can't stand up in front of a group of people and talk about it, but this I could do." And I think it's really important for churches to realize there are people that want to step in. We just have to provide a way that they can get there. I work with the Orange County Human Trafficking Taskforce. We do basically 3 things. We do education and outreach into the community. So it means I'll talk to a junior high group about fair trade, because that's a safe topic for junior hires. And you get to sneak in the idea of slavery and trafficking and child labor and such. It means having a table at the Orange County Fair for 5 weeks so that people can walk up and, "What? What do you mean there's human trafficking in Orange County? I saw it on Law and Order over in India, but what are you talking about?" And it means working with the local Orange County victims, coming alongside their case managers, and just supplementing in services. You need somebody to drive you to the dentist? You need somebody to help you apply for your first job? You need somebody to teach you how to ride the bus? Those are the practical needs that somebody who's either on their own for the first time or new to our country needs. And then our task force also does law enforcement training for the entire state of California, because law enforcement has to know what to look for and what questions to ask. The goal for Vineyard Justice Network is to be a resource to churches, vineyard churches in the U.S. We're not trying to make another organization, but we want to encourage people to broaden their ideas of what their particular ministries are. In other words, so you're involved with the immigrant population, you need to also know about human trafficking. You need to also know about gender inequality and the things that people bring over with their cultures, you know. So we're trying to help people to learn from each other. We want people to know what resources are available so that I can call you because I know that you are doing this. And we just want to get the word out into the Vineyard that you don't have to be a mega church. You don't have to be a rich church. You just have to have a heart. You have to have God's heart for compassion and mercy and serving people. Well, what's been helpful to me is I also volunteer in our compassion ministry at our church, which is serving people who need food and clothes. They can come for prayer. But because of that, I have worked with a lot of the immigrant population and the homeless population. And I've been in touch with very at-risk youth and developed relationships with them. And I realized you can't ignore any of that if you're going to try to prevent human trafficking. It's all combined. Orange County is the perfect storm when it comes to human trafficking because we've got a large diversity, so nobody's going to notice 20 extra Vietnamese or Latino or whatever people in the neighborhood. We've got a lot of money, and we're close to the border. And so with that whole issue about how easy it is to sneak across the border, we're not just talking about individuals sneaking themselves across the border. We're talking about traffickers bringing people from Europe to Mexico because they know that's the easiest way to get them into the country. And so you have to deal with immigration, you have to deal with poverty, you have to deal with immigrant populations and what they face when they come to a new country and what happens when they have been brought across without any resources. At-risk youth, at-risk immigrant youth, at-risk immigrant second language youth, it's all tied together. I think it has been really exciting to see how quickly people started connecting. It's like, oh, finally I'm in a room full of people that understand what it is that I feel like God's calling me to do. And so far, the number one issue has been, how do we get the rest of the church involved? Either how do I get the rest of my church involved? How do we get them to understand that this is God's heart? And, you know, on the one hand, I say, well, you know, I just started bringing it to little groups in the church. You know, I went to women's ministry, went to men's ministry, went to the youth ministry, da-da-da-da-da. I wasn't a senior pastor. But on the other hand, I'm from the Anaheim Vineyard, John Wimber's church, and John basically founded the Vineyard movement on worship and compassionate ministry. He was always about worship, he was always about praying for the sick, and he was always about caring for the poor.